Mr. President.
Senator from New Jersey.
Mr. President, first I'd like to ask unanimous consent that Craig Bryan, a fellow in my office, be given floor privileges for the remainder of the day.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, I came here to speak in support of the nomination of Christopher Hill to be the ambassador to Iraq, but I have heard my colleague, my distinguished colleague in South Carolina, and I just feel compelled to say a few things in response. You know, it is easy to rail against the government when you are part of it. It is easy to rail against the government, but when we have a national disaster, whether it be September 11th, or hurricanes, or floods, or tornadoes, it is only the national government that can come and help our fellow citizens. It is only the national government that can come at the end of the day and create a common defense. And it is only the national government that very often can stop us from economic collapse. Now, I am for the free market as much as anyone else, but there is a difference between a free market and a free-for-all market. And what we saw over the last 8 years is regulators who are supposed to act as the cops on the beat, ultimately allowing the private sector, particularly those who are regulated industries, to regulate themselves. And the consequences of that is that we have excesses that now each and every American is paying for. And yet there are those who want to rail against that. And there are those who also rail about spending. I'm with them, but the time to have railed against that was in the last years that saw the debt and the deficit dramatically grow. And if President Obama did absolutely nothing, he would have inherited a $1.3 trillion deficit. So I think we need some intellectual honesty in this chamber as we have our debates. I want to talk about the President's nomination of Christopher Hill to serve as our next ambassador to Iraq. I support that. It should be clear to all of us that the position of the ambassador to Iraq is one of the most critical ambassadorial selections that President Obama will make. We are at the beginning of a period of transition in our relationships with Iraq. We are now working under a status of forces agreement. Our troops are winding down their combat role, and many will withdraw by June 30th of this year. In his speech to the Marine Corps at Camp Lejeune at the end of February, President Obama made his policy clear. By the 31st day of August, the year 2010, in accordance with the status of forces agreement, the combat mission of U.S. troops in Iraq will come to an end. But even though the end of our combat mission in Iraq may now be in sight, we cannot forget that today we still have more than 140,000 U.S. troops there. And we have over 1,000 U.S. civilian employees from the Department of State, from USAID, and many other departments and agencies who have been assigned to work at the embassy in Baghdad under the authority of our Chief of Mission. We all look forward to the day when our combat mission in Iraq has ended, our troops have returned home, and Iraqis enjoy relative peace and security under the full protection of their own security forces. But that day has not yet come. We're at the beginning, not the end, of the transition in our role in Iraq. It is a time of uncertainty and risk, and that is why it's so urgent that the ambassador's position be filled without delay. You see, the military counterpart is constantly saying, General Adorno, saying, where is my civilian counterpart? Where is the ambassador? Now, I certainly respect the decision of any colleague to closely scrutinize any of the President's appointments. This is a keystone position at a critical juncture in our relationship with Iraq, and we need to ensure that the person leading our embassy in Baghdad is and has, in full measure, the background, skills, and pragmatism needed. And, Mr. President, I've scrutinized Ambassador Hill's qualifications and his testimony, both before the Foreign Relations Committee, of which I am a member, and in responding to questions for the record. And I am convinced that in nominating Ambassador Hill, President Obama has chosen exactly the right person to lead our embassy in Baghdad at this point in time. And I urge my colleagues to confirm his nomination without delay. During his 32-year career in the Foreign Service, Ambassador Hill has developed a well-earned reputation as a diplomatic troubleshooter by taking on a series of difficult assignments, including serving as an ambassador in the Balkans, special envoy to Kosovo, ambassador to Poland and South Korea, and most recently a special envoy to the six-party talks involving North Korea's nuclear program. He was one of the State Department's top negotiators during the 1995 Dayton talks that ended the war in Bosnia. He has never balked from taking on the most difficult assignments and has a long list of honors and awards which stand as evidence of his accomplishments. Now, one of the issues raised by my colleague earlier concerns about Mr. Ambassador Hill's experience or lack of experience in the Middle East. It should be noted that our three prior ambassadors in Baghdad, Ryan Crocker, Zalmi Khalilzad, and John Negroponte, the persons who know best the experience needed to do the job, do not share this concern. They have expressed their support for Ambassador Hill's confirmation. Now, I am confident that the experience Ambassador Hill has gained in other areas can be readily applied to the challenges he will face in Iraq. Ambassador Hill's experience in coordinating the multilateral negotiations on North Korea's nuclear program will serve him well when he seeks the help of Iraq's neighbors on regional security issues. That experience will also serve him well in working with Iraq's numerous political factions. And Ambassador Hill's experience in the Balkans has prepared him to deal with sectarianism, border disputes, human rights, refugees, developmental assistance, and post-conflict normalization of relations, all of which will be major issues in his portfolio in Baghdad. Now, finally, I share the concerns expressed by my colleague about North Korea's human rights records, and I agree completely with Ambassador Hill's own assessment of that record of North Korea when he said, it's abysmal. But as others have noted, Ambassador Hill's mission with regard to North Korea was set by his superiors in the Bush administration, not by him. And the primary objective was to push the North Koreans to end their nuclear weapons program and their nuclear proliferation activities. That was his mission directed by the Bush administration. That is the mission he undertook to accomplish. I appreciate Ambassador Hill's continued willingness to take on these tough assignments. He is the right person to lead our embassy in Baghdad at this time, and I urge his nomination be confirmed without delay. Finally, let me just say, I too often hear on the other side of the aisle a very familiar refrain lately. It is no. No to just about everything that we are trying to do here. President Obama is trying to move this country that he was elected to do with an overwhelming support in a different direction. And what we hear consistently on the other side of the aisle, using the procedural mechanisms of the filibuster in this institution, is no, and no, and no. And then, while they hold up nominees like yesterday's nominees for assistant attorney generals, incredibly important to the attorney general of this country, for law and order in this country, when we get to the vote, we see overwhelming bipartisan votes. But we've delayed it an inordinate amount of time. Instead of having those people work for the security of the country, instead of being able to move this agenda forward, instead of having more time for the Senate to meet some of the critical challenges the nation has. It's time to get over the no's and start saying yes to some of the critical issues we need. The first yes should be today with Ambassador Hill, and that will move our foreign policy agenda in one of the most critical parts of the world we need. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.